Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this afternoon's PRONI talk to mark the end of the exhibition With an Artist's Eye, the photography of Mary Alice Young of Galgorm Castle, Ballymena. Before we start off, I just want to mention a few housekeeping matters. We are recording this talk, so if you do not wish your face to appear on camera, just turn off your camera now. I could see everybody so far has done so, so that's great. Just to let you all know, to reduce background noise during the talk, we have muted everyone on entry, but please, if you have any comments or questions as the talks go on, just please put them in the chat function and we'll come back to them at the end of today's event. So the focus of today's event is to provide a bit of background to the project that produced the Mary Alice Young photographic exhibition. This project was the result of a collaboration between PRONI staff, Mid and East Antrim Borough Council, and Christopher Brooke, the great-grandson of Mary Alice Young. So I'm just going to share my screen now. Apologies, I'll just go back there. Right. Yes, so the exhibition, and I hope you had a chance to visit the exhibition in PRONI, but if not, fear not, because you'll see plenty of the images from the exhibition as we go through today's proceedings. So the exhibition featured a sample of 100 images taken from Mary Alice Young's photographic collection, which is held at PRONI. The exhibition marked the final stage in a project that saw PRONI staff and partners work together to learn more about Mary Alice Young herself and about the 1,000 plus photographs that make up her photographic collection. The project drew on the expertise of PRONI staff and resulted in the collection being cleaned and rehoused, digitised and made available through the PRONI catalogue as a resource for the public to enjoy. So my name is Lorraine Burke and I am the head of private records here in PRONI. So I will start off today's proceedings by giving a very brief introduction to the Galgorm papers, which are held at PRONI, and to Mary Alice Young and her family. I'll then hand over to my colleagues who will talk about their contribution to the project. So first of all, I will hand over to Sarah Graham, who is PRONI's Head of Conservation, and then Sarah will hand over to Joy Carey, who is PRONI's Digitisation and Reprographics Unit Manager. At the end of our three talks, we'll revert back to me again, and I will take any questions that have been put in the chat function and divide them out between the three of us as we see best. So I'll start off. So the Galgorm papers transferred to PRONI in 1975 and were deposited by Mary Alice Young's daughter Hilda, who was the wife of Lieutenant Colonel Arthur O'Neill Cubitt Chichester. It is a relatively small family and estate collection, and it includes title deeds and settlements relating to Galgorm. Of most interest, I suppose, in terms of the scope of today's talk, are those papers that relate to the purchase of Galgorm Castle domain and the outlying estate by Dr. William Young of Ballymena in 1851. Also within the collection are, I'll just get that person there. Also within the collection are labour account books dating from 1857, stock books, game books, a small amount of rentals, business and estate correspondence. I'm sorry, now my screen has just frozen there, but I'll just carry on. Some of the papers within the collection have been returned to the depositor over the years, and these include scrapbooks, some newspaper cuttings, and unfortunately diaries, including some belonging to Mary Alice Young and her family. Thankfully, though, within the collection, we have some diaries dating from 1934 to 1946 of Mary Alice Young's herself, and these are still retained within the collection. Also, and again, unfortunately for the project, photograph albums which Mary Alice Young had compiled herself were also at one stage returned to family members, and over the period of time became misplaced. So if the photograph albums had survived and had remained in PRONI, it would have made the project a lot easier and helped us in identifying locations, events, and individuals that featured within the collection. But it wasn't to be. We had to do it the hard way. So I'm afraid I am going to have to stop sharing now and come back in again because my screen has frozen. So I'll just stop sharing for the moment and come back in. So bear with me. Here we go. So of most interest for us today and for the focus of today's talks are the photographs that feature within the collection. So the photographic collection, when it transferred to PRONI in 1975, comprised 48 boxes containing over 1,100 glass plate and cellulose negatives. Given their format, these photographs could not be made available to the public. Prior to the project, the catalogue descriptions of the photographs were very limited. We were unable to identify individuals and locations that featured within the collection. The project, thankfully, has changed access to the collection and our knowledge of it considerably, and for the better. Mary Alice Young, then, just to give a bit of information about the woman, the photographer herself, was born in 1867, and she was the eldest of Sir Francis MacNaughton and Mary Alice Mary Russell's 4 children. The family was extremely wealthy and well connected. Mary Alice's childhood home was Dunderav in County Antrim, but she also spent a considerable amount of time at Runkerry, near Port Ballantrae, which her grandfather had built and which she loved and returned to constantly throughout her life. On the 28th of August, 1893, she married William, better known as Willie Young. Willie was the eldest of John Young and Grace Savage's 13 children. The couple had 6 sons, 1 died in infancy, and we have a photograph here of John Young Sr. and his surviving 5 sons, with Willie Young featured at the front, sitting beside his father. The Youngs had amassed a considerable fortune through the linen trade, and their wealth and the purchase of Galgorm Castle in 1851 enabled them to move in prominent social and political circles. Willie Young was a prominent figure in Ulster Unionism. He was an important figure locally in County Antrim. He was a Justice of the Peace, High Sheriff of County Antrim, and most notably in 1921, he was appointed Privy Councillor. Within the collection at PRONI, there's a letter from James Craig himself, dated the 2nd of June, 1921, when he writes to his friend Willie to say, "I write to ask whether I may have the privilege of submitting your name through His Excellency the Lord Lieutenant, and recommending that you be created a Privy Councillor, Ireland." And of course, it was particularly significant being appointed at this stage in that Willie was the Privy Councillor at the opening of the Northern Ireland Parliament in July 1921. In his memoir, Willie Young records his engagement as the happiest day of his life, and the marriage between Willie and Mary Alice Young was a happy one. Mary Alice Young, in her own memoirs, records falling in love with Galgorm Castle when she first saw it, and she made her home there. And the photographic collection vividly captures not just the house, Mary Alice's family and friends who visited the house and the estate, but also all those who lived and worked on the estate. Mary Alice herself was also involved in local politics. She was a Justice of the Peace and was elected to Ballymena Rural Council in 1924. Her engagement diaries that have survived in PRONI just show just what a busy woman she was, attending numerous committee meetings from everything ranging from board of management of schools to scouting clubs. So very active in her local community. The couple's only child, Hilda Grace, was born on the 22nd of June, 1896, and Hilda Grace features frequently in her mother's collection at all stages in her life, which is lovely. We see Hilda growing before our eyes, from a young girl playing with her pets to the confident young woman there in the final photograph featured on her confirmation. So as I said in the beginning, the partnership was not just did not just involve PRONI staff, it also involved the Heritage and Museum staff at Mid and East Antrim Borough Council and the depositors family, including Christopher Brooke, great-grandson of Mary Alice Young, and his sister Juliana Goss. And from them, we learned so much about the family and some of the buildings and locations and people that featured within the collection. For example, this photograph of Hilda with what we thought was a young deer turned out to be a photograph of Hilda with a deer that turned out to be a stag, Daisy the deer, who turned out not to be a deer, and then the photograph there you know, of Hilda with her work basket and her needlework. We learned from Christopher and Juliana that their grandmother, Hilda, was an extremely talented seamstress. And before the exhibition came to PRONI, it went it launched in the Braid Museum in Ballymena, and some of Hilda's beautiful needlework featured within that exhibition. So it was lovely seeing the collection coming to life, literally, before our eyes. Oops, sorry, I'll just go on. Hilda was also very close, or I beg your pardon, Mary Alice was also very close to her sister, Hilda. Hilda's second husband was Richard Grove Ainsley. The couple had 3 children, including twins, Patrick and Diana, Didy, though, as she was known to the family, who was born on the 11th of September, both born the 11th of September 1911. So Hilda, Ainsley, the twins, her husband, and their home at Ainsgrove in Cork, and the beautiful gardens at Ainsgrove in Cork feature within the collection. And as does Mary Alice herself. So Mary Alice took up photography around 1890 and continued to take photographs for probably more or less the next 20 years or so. As our colleague Gareth started digitising the collection, this photograph on the left was the first we had of Mary Alice herself, or at least the shadow that Mary Alice cast when she stood with her camera and tripod to take this photograph. We later, as Gareth's work continued, found that she featured in a small number of photographs. And we have her featured there with her husband, Willie, in this case, walking away a little bit impatiently from this photograph. At the top there in the middle of the screen, and there is Mary Alice again in the group photograph. She's at the back and her husband, Willie, is seated at the steps at the front. So she does feature in a number of the photographs, a small number admittedly, and this and the fact that some photographs have been monogrammed HGY rather than MAY, which of course stands for Mary Alice Young, but some of the photographs were monogrammed HGY, which suggests that there was probably another photographer within the family. The most likely possibility being Mary Alice's brother-in-law, Brigadier General Henry George Young, who resided in Skeffington Lodge in Antrim and who regularly visited the family in Galgorm Castle. So if that's the case, we have Henry to thank for this wonderful photograph of Mary Alice Young caught in the act of photographing herself, which is just lovely to have as part of the collection. As the project unfolded and as the exhibition launched, we have been delighted that members of the public have really engaged with this collection and with Mary Alice Young and with her photographs. And we have members of the public to thank for helping us to identify further individuals and locations within the collection. So, for example, there are a few photographs within the collection that feature people skating. And a number of members of the public said that they had similar photographs, and that these photographs were taken on Lough Neagh in the late 1890s, that Lough Neagh had been prone to freezing. And one gentleman got in touch with us to say that they used to hold barbecues of roast cattle in the middle of Lough Neagh and have parties. And he said you could go from one side of Lough Neagh to the other, even in a horse and cart, because the ice was so thick. So it's just hard to credit that. So it was lovely when people got in touch. Also, we had volunteers helping with us on one day, and they were able to bring their local knowledge to bear on the collection and identify some locations for us. And within the collection, there are some really vivid photographs of people working on the bog. And some of the volunteers that were with us identified the bog as possibly being Gary Bog, which is located between Ballymena and Ballymoney in County Antrim. And I suppose I should say here that Mary Alice Young, her collection, it's not just a photograph of the great and the good and her friends and family. It really is a vivid insight into people of all social levels living in and around the estate in the late 19th and early 20th century. Finally here, the last image that I have on the slide, a member of civil service staff got in touch to say that this gentleman, the instrument he's holding was known as a seed fiddle drill, and it was used to sow seeds. So all that information has been added into our catalogue descriptions and will help enrich them, and not just enrich our knowledge of the collection, but hopefully add to the public interest as well. I just very quickly now want to say that the digitized images are available to view through the PRONI catalogue on site only, but the catalogue descriptions, the information about the collection can be accessed online. So you can do this from the comfort of your own home before you come into PRONI. If you haven't searched our e-catalogue before, there is helpful information available on our website, including a how to search the catalogue video. So you can either search by keyword or by catalogue reference number. The reference number for the Galgorm papers at PRONI is D3027. This brings us to a page relating to the photographs within the collection, and D3027 bar 8 bar C relates specifically to the glass plate and cellulose negatives. So you can either hit more there and get the covering description, which puts the photographs in context, or go to the left and click on the reference number, which brings you up. For example, if we look at bar C bar 1, we see, if you can't see it all on my screen, but as I said, there are 48 boxes. So D3027 bar 8 bar C bar 1 all the way down to 48. Again, if you hit on more, it'll give you a bit of information about the photographs within that box as it was originally. Or if you hit on the reference number to the left, it will it'll give you a list of the contents, the actual photographs associated with each box. And in this case now, if we hit on more, we'll get the catalogue description for the individual photograph. So everything has been catalogued right down to the level of the individual photograph. As you can see here, it says that the photograph is open and the digitized copy of the photograph is open, but access to the digitized copy is on site only. There's a description there which also mentions the level of post-digitization work that was undertaken on the photograph. So I will stop sharing now, and I will hand over to my colleague Sarah, because obviously before we got to this stage, there was an awful lot of work required from the conservation end, and Sarah will tell you all about that now.
Okay, am I muted? Can you hear me okay? That's great, thank you. I'll just start my, there we go. Right, so I think there are three outcomes of this project, right? The catalogue enrichment, the digital images, which was the basis of the exhibition, and the rehousing and improved long-term preservation of the original negatives. And obviously, from conservation, I'll be speaking about the latter one there. So why did they need conservation before digitisation? Well, the housing they were in at the start of the project was very understandable, but left plenty of room for improvement. They were and continue to be located on static rather than rolling bays in the stores, so that they're not disturbed by access to other collections. They're in standard PRONI boxes, which are in the middle at the bottom here. And these had 3 or 4 smaller boxes, which had been repurposed from another collection. There are these boxes on the top and round to the right here. The intention here was to provide a sturdy enclosure to protect them from breakages, but they were grouped according to the boxes that Lorraine was explaining they're catalogued as. And so it was according to a previous structure rather than according to the size of the plate. This has caused them to slip out during the decant to the new premises here in the Titanic Quarter. Another disadvantage is that they are not acid-free, which means that the rate of deterioration is not being reduced as we would wish. Inside the boxes, the plates were in individual glassine enclosures. This is an improvement from the brown paper packages we can see wrapped around the blank plates. Here we go, in the bottom left here. They were popular for photographs as they start off as a buffered, acid-free and translucent, but over time they can yellow and become acidic. The good intent was also bent a bit sideways with the biro and Tipex and a few rogue left stick down, but it's easy to criticize with hindsight. As you can see, they crumple, making it harder to remove the glass plates without extensive handling. In fact, when I was removing them for cleaning, I just tore them open so the glass plate wouldn't be disturbed. The orange label here next to these bundles of glass plate was in one of the boxes, and it's quite interesting. It's the returns policy for the plate, should they be ineffective. If failures arise with these plates, do not assume the fault is in the manufacturer, but return the results and the remainder of the plates carefully back for examination. Please quote batch number, return the slip and place your letter outside the box of unexposed plates. There are 2 distinct sides to the plates. One is the glass side, and the other is coated in a light-sensitive gelatin emulsion. This note shows that Young was purchasing her plates pre-made rather than coating the glass to herself, which was further confirmed by the missing thumbprint in the corner of the glass plate and entries in a Galgorm account book discovered by my records management colleagues, Rebecca from Lorraine's team. While her plates had been produced elsewhere, you can see her hand in the way that she edited the plates after they had been exposed. The 2 photos on top show Young using masking paint to change the image. On the left, the paint is thick, creating opaque brushstrokes to block the light coming through and creating a white area on the positive image. And on the right, she is creating a texture which makes the goat head look as though it is outdoors. This usually happens on the emulsion side. The photos at the bottom show where Young has adhered the paper to the glass side, effectively cropping the photos and creating a white border. There were 3 main types of damage to the collections. Overwhelmingly, the most common cause of damage is when the glass itself is broken. The top plate has started to crack, on the top right here, has started to crack, and it's important to add support at this point so it doesn't break completely. Corners, unsurprisingly, are particularly vulnerable and prone to break off, but in some instances, the plates shatter. When you're faced with an envelope of shards, transmitted light is needed so that you can see the image enough to reposition the small pieces of glass. These 2 photographs down the bottom right here, this is an envelope of shards, and then on the light box in one of the enclosures, the new enclosures. It gives you a rare glimpse of the image when usually the conservators are working with dark negatives. So the mirroring of these 2 negatives on the left, It's fairly frequent throughout the collection. It most commonly happens around the border of both negatives and positives and absolutely looks like a mirror. It's where the silver oxidizes and migrates to the outside of the gelatin layer. The location of the mirroring around the border here also hints that the damage is due to humidity or air pollutants rather than contact with inappropriate storage materials. Thankfully, there was only one example of the gelatin emulsion layer delaminated from the glass, which you can see on the right here. This can happen by itself, but in this instance, it is likely that the glass cracked first and then pulled at the emulsion. As the gelatin has been released from the glass, it has contracted, causing the split along the bottom here. Before I move on to the next slide, the negative on the bottom left here looks different from the others, and that's because it's a cellulose nitrate base. During rehousing, I came across several envelopes which were labelled as cellulose negatives, meaning that they could either be the toxically flammable nitrate negatives or the stable acetate or safety film. Important to distinguish between the two. One of the first questions I asked once I started working at PRONI was whether we had any nitrate film in our collections, but I should have been a bit more specific. The film in PRONI's archives had been surveyed a number of years ago with the nitrate film safely disposed of. Therefore, the assumption would be that these were acetate. But a conservator is always paranoid and usually rightly so. These still negatives had slipped through and were more clearly identifiable as they started to deteriorate. You can see them turning yellow and starting to curl. Acetate would cockle instead. These are digitized by Gareth, but I was concerned about the heat from the light box with such a flammable material. So he designed a vented stand out of boxboard with a piece of glass on top. During rehousing and digitization, the negatives were kept in the flammables cabinet and then frozen to keep the rest of the collection safe. And here we've got in the middle, the negative, the cellulose nitrate negative, and then the positive photograph that Gareth took. The cleaning itself was fairly straightforward. The emulsion side was gently brushed with a goat hair brush, and the glass side carefully swirled with industrial denatured alcohol, essentially IMS by a different name. The alcohol is used because it has a quicker evaporation rate, and I was careful not to remove anything which indicated the use of the plates by Mary Alice Young, such as fingerprints, etc. The new enclosures are made from a paper called Silver Safe, which has undergone the photographic activity test. My colleague Rose cut out over 1,200 full flaps so that the glass plates can have an individual enclosure that opens out, making the glass plates easy to remove for Gareth. The top flap is made 10 millimeters longer, so there is space to the right. There is space to write the PRONI reference. There are 4 different sizes of glass plate negatives, and in the photo on the right, I was grouping them according to size, limiting the number to about 50, and then each went into a bespoke acid-free boxboard box. This stops them from getting too heavy and from moving around. The plates, which have the additional boards and cotton tape wrapped around them, are broken, and these boards apply gentle pressure to keep the fragments in place. That's it for me. I'll now hand over to Joy.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joy Carey, and I manage the digitisation unit in PRONI. I'm going to talk to you about the project from our perspective. So first of all, I just wanted to show you this slide. It gives you some idea of the type of camera that would have been in use in the second half of the 19th century and the type of kit that Mary Alice Young would have been using to produce her half-plate size glass negatives. And that's the size of one there on the left-hand side. There were dry gelatin silver bromide plates, which had an exposure time in the camera of just a few seconds. And this was a real jump in progress from older wet plate collodion process, where exposures were around a minute. And if the light levels were quite low, then it might have been even longer than that as well. These faster, more portable dry plate process enabled photographers to attempt a wider range of subjects, such as Mary Alice Young's images of horses jumping, and our outdoor images that were taken in more remote locations. So there's just a few examples of things that are able to be captured with these new faster glass plates than would have been before with the wet plate collodion. So you've got the jumping horse and the fox, and also the running water, movement of water. At the turn of the century then, Mary Alice would have also started to use a camera like the Kodak #1 Brownie, which you see here in the bottom left. It could take sheet or rolled negative film. It was a small, portable, easy to use camera, and it brought photography to the masses. The images of people that you see here, Lorraine's already shown the central one there, which we're thinking is Mary Alice herself. And the one on the right is possibly her brother-in-law, Henry George Young, who also seems to have taken some of the photographs in the collection. And they're using Kodak Brownies or very similar cameras. The original Brownie was made of cardboard and wood, and you could purchase one in America for just $1 at the beginning, and that equates to about £26 sterling now in today's money. So what you did was take all 100 exposures, and then you sent your camera, the whole camera with the film in it, back to Eastman Kodak, and it was developed there, and you would have had they would have inserted a new roll of film for you and posted it back to you. So, I wanted to show you this as well after Lorraine had showed us the nice picture that I'm showing you again on the bottom right of Mary Alice Young's shadow as the gentleman in her life try and fix the car. I just thought this was great. As I was researching the Kodak Brownie, I found this lovely poster promoting Kodak cameras, and you can see just how on the pulse of what's going on in the ladies of the day in their lives, you know, that they might want to have photographed. So I thought that was really good. It immediately made me think of the images in the collection showing the cars broken down, and Mary Alice must have got out and taken some photographs at that time. So wanted to show you that one. So from the Brownie, we're moving on 100 years to the top of the range Phase 1 IQ4, and that's the type of camera which is in use today here in the Reprographic studio. And that's my colleague Gareth Montgomery in the picture, using the Phase 1 IQ4 with a 120mm Schneider macro lens to digitize the May negative images. So the glass negative is placed on a light box, and that illuminates the image from below, while the IQ4 is mounted above the physical object to take the best possible digital master image. The camera is tethered to a PC running Capture One software, and that's the digital processing software program which works with the Phase 1 cameras. So I'm going to talk a little bit about restoration of digitized archive photographs now. So in the context of cultural heritage digitization, the term digital restoration refers to the process of electronically altering and manipulating a digitized reproduction of an original physical historic artifact. So it's achieved by using image editing software programs in order to correct or remove visible imperfections that are inherent in the original, caused through physical, chemical, or biological damage made manifest during the lifetime of the negative. So what digital restoration work did we do at PRONI for the images displayed in the May exhibition downstairs? Sorry, I'm saying May, I mean Mary Alice Young. So because they were to be exhibited, and because we didn't have at that time any original positive prints to look at to see how Mary Alice herself might have intended them to look, the whole project team, so that was PRONI staff, Mid and East Antrim Council staff who were a project partner, and the depositor Christopher Brooke, decided that we should present them as we considered they would look their best for display purposes, and in the way we hoped that Mary Alice Young might have wanted them to look as well at the time she took them. So there's understandably a level of subjectivity to this, but when we considered that it's quite unlikely that Mary Alice would have actually developed and printed her own photographs, Christopher Brooke remembers no talk in the family of, you know, there being a darkroom at Galgorm, and there's no physical evidence of there having ever been a darkroom there. So we thought it was much more likely that she would have taken her exposed negatives to a local professional photographer, or perhaps a commercial supplier of photographic equipment and consumables to be processed. So what I'm getting at here is there would have been subjectivity to that process because they would have done that for her. And if she'd taken the same negative to perhaps a few different places for processing, it could have come back looking very different depending on how that professional decided that the image was best toned or developed. So Gareth, our archive photographer, has applied 3 main types of restoration to these digitized negatives. The first is exposure optimization, the second being correcting visual degradation of the gelatin emulsion layer, and the third is digitally piecing together and fixing broken negatives. So starting with exposure, which is shown quite well in this plate, all of the negatives in the collection were created by natural light exposure, so none of them by artificial electric light. The majority were taken out of doors in daylight, but others were shot inside, lit by strong light from a window, such as in this case, or some of them were in an open doorway taken from outside looking in. Almost all the negatives we found were overexposed, so there was too much light exposed to them. And Mary Alice would have lost some image definition, definitely, and contrast using the developing and printing techniques that were available on her day. The image on the right here, and please ignore the crosses on it just for now, it shows a straightened version of the negative on the left. It looks faded and washed out, so whoever processed her photographs for her at the time would have had to leave the photographic paper in the developing bath for longer to increase the contrast of the positive print. Gareth, in the digital world, used an editing tool which is similar to the densitometer process that would have been used in a darkroom to improve the exposure of the images. So it works by identifying, and that's where the little crosses come in to play. We identify where the Dmax, which is maximum density area of the image is, and the Dmin area, minimum density. So that's the very darkest part of the image and the very brightest part of the image. And we tell the computer program, this is true black and this is true white. So we've got the darkest part being the shadow behind Hilda Grace's face in this example, and the D-min area being the light through the very overexposed window. And once these have been identified, the software program can then apply true black and true white and correct the in-between tones by extrapolating from those values what the tones in between should be set at, and that corrects overexposure. So densitometers weren't used until the 1930s. So as I said, the printers in May's time, Mary Alice's time, would have had to do it just by sight as the image magically appears in the developing bath. With Photoshop, we're lucky now we can also adjust the midtones, which is something which they wouldn't have been able to do either. So we can kind of mask off certain sections of the image so that you can just apply exposure to it and not all the areas. So that's the image which was beautifully corrected and toned sensitively with a duotone filter of black and Pantone warm grey, and we chose to do that for display purposes again. So this negative, Lorraine showed this one in its positive form earlier, and I'm going to show it again. It's the one of the bedroom, and there's quite a lot of issues going on here. As you can tell, there's overexposure in the top left where the scene's lit by bright natural light from the bedroom window. And there's a few really severe cracks running horizontally, and that would have been from impact damage. And there's degradation of the gelatin emulsion, which is the binder layer, which contains those photosensitive chemicals which react to light when it's exposed in the camera. There looks to be staining also of the gelatin emulsion. In this example, you can see the orange discoloration that's most prominent in the top right-hand side of the plate. We think it could be particles of rust which have dissolved in places on the surface, maybe because of storage in a humid environment at some time. So in order to restore this image to how we imagine Mary Alice might have hoped it to look, the following steps were taken. So first of all, it's inverted to its positive, as seen here, and then it's rendered in shades of grey. So all the colour tones are taken away to make it just grayscale. Then it's digitally cleaned of any surface marks or imperfections, which are not part of the image itself. And that's done by zooming really close in to the image on Photoshop, and then cloning a small, very, very small area, sometimes just pixel at a time, near to the imperfection or the missing part, and then you cover it with the cloned piece of information. So the same technique as that is used for cracks as well, where lost parts of the image can be infilled by cloning. And finally, then the correct level of exposure set according to what I've told you already, and the duotone filters applied to the image. This is one I think maybe Sarah included in her part of the talk. So this is where the emulsion layer has delaminated, peeled away from the glass support. This is probably because it's been stored in an environment where the temperature and the relative humidity were too high, or perhaps where they've been cycling between hot and humid, hot, cold, damp and dry conditions, maybe perhaps seasonally. So the gelatin itself, the emulsion layer, is hygroscopic, which means that it absorbs water. It's expanded and contracted in these hot, cold environment, humid and dry, whereas the inert glass support wouldn't have done that. So that's why the emulsion has peeled away from the glass. It's possible for peeling emulsion to be floated off glass and re-adhered by a specialist photographic conservator, but that would be incredibly labor intensive, as I'm sure you can imagine, expensive, and it's also not guaranteed to work. So instead, what we did was digitize the negative. We split the digital reproduction into smaller sections using Photoshop, and we used warping and skewing tools, which the distortions can then be kind of rectified and manipulated back into their true place, and the image can be reconstructed in this way. So there's nothing being added or taken away. It's just kind of the distortion that's happened because of the humidity is kind of flattened out again, if you like. So this is the unrestored inverted copy. And then this is the fully restored copy. Although this reconstruction takes a lot of time and concentration, it's non-destructive and, as I said, non-subjective. It enables us to present the original image as it would have been experienced by the photographer. So finally, again, the exposure is optimized and the duotone warm filter is applied. So this last one shows you quite a severe breakage of the glass plate. With most of the plates, a lot of the plates had a bit of breakage, but not all of the shards were always present. They just had been lost at some point. Sometimes they're so small or thin that they're kind of unusable with regard to digital restoration as well. So the bigger and cleaner a break is, the easier it is to piece it back together. But the process is the same in all cases. Each broken place is isolated and photographed just by itself. And then all those individual images are layered in Photoshop, and then each broken piece can be moved independently and kind of shunted into place where its original place would have been. So it's a wee bit like doing a jigsaw, but pieces of varying size. And of course, we don't have any picture to compare or work alongside to know how it's meant to look. Where the gelatin break is very sharp, it can be done with precision, but sometimes the gelatin layer on the glass has been stretched a little bit, or it can be missing little bits have broken off, or it's delaminated from the glass. So again, each fragment needs to be adjusted by some warping and skewing tools to enable it to be pieced back together as it should look. So when all the pieces are merged back, put back into the correct position, they're merged into one image, one TIFF format image, and the missing pieces can be reconstructed by cloning adjacent parts of the image that we know to be accurate. So after the image is reconstructed, exposure issues can be addressed again and the toning applied just for the consistency of the aesthetic for our exhibition purposes. So I just wanted to show you this because I'm quite interested in this area in digital restoration, especially with regard to heritage institutions such as PRONI. We have a legislative remit, obviously, to preserve the historical record and not to alter it. And there are some ethical implications that digital restoration addresses and implications on how far we can take that type of restoration work. We want to be able to stay away as much as possible from subjective reconstructions. We don't want to create something new that we don't know is correct. So these are a few interesting examples of digital restoration and colorization. Some have been applied by heritage institutions, such as in the Faces of Auschwitz website, which is the Auschwitz-Birkenheim Museum. It's probably the most dubious Oh, sorry. The most dubious I've come across, however, is the faces of the victims of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia in the 1970s. There was a public outcry and lots of media attention when smiles were added to the faces of the victims. You can see the young boy here in the bottom right. These images were put up on a website called Vice Asia. So at PRONI, we prefer to keep restoration objective where possible, such as inverting a negative image to the positive, adjusting overall exposure to display the photograph as originally intended. We certainly don't want to be manipulating or putting a subjective reinterpretation onto the historical record in any way. So as part of this work, I came up with some recommendations for digitisation professionals when working with historic imagery. It's so important to retain a master copy which accurately records the current condition of the artifact itself, and that would be in the negative format if that's how the object looks. And then if you are considering doing any restoration, just to carefully consider what value that will add and why, you know, what the justification for doing it would be. To document every action that's done so that that can be revisited in the future and people know what has happened. For a range of stakeholders to be involved in the decision making to ensure that, you know, everybody's got a say in how things are shown and displayed, and also give consideration to presenting perhaps both the unrestored and restored version with some explanatory information as to why that restoration has taken place. So that's the end of my talk. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand back to Lorraine for any questions.